Welcome back into One Winning Pod, where we're hoping the Ravens can shake off an incredibly frustrating loss to the Pittsburgh Steelers. If you listen to our recap of that, you know that a big thing that can really help us this week is catching the football. And we are going to be back in London once again for the second time in Ravens history. And I guess all we can say about that is it can only go up from last time. Absolute worst case scenario last time, so we'll just see what happens here. We will be playing a noted foe, the Tennessee Titans, and so as it is Titans week, we have a guest returning to the show who wasn't able to be on the past two seasons due to this matchup not being on the calendar, but he is back. Titans fan Tim. How's it going, Tim?
Good. Thanks for having me back.
Definitely happy to have you. This is a very interesting matchup with the Ravens currently projected to win, I guess, by 3.5 points. That's what they're favored by Vegas. Over under 40 points, looking like a low scoring affair. The Ravens are in London already. Tim, do you know if the Titans have traveled yet?
The Titans will actually be practicing in Nashville before the game. Last year when they were in London, they practiced in London and didn't go very well. And I guess Vrabel thought that was part of the reason. So he's going to be having all the practices in the U.S. and then traveling.
Yeah, it's funny to see, all this talk is being done about, what teams should go out there and shouldn't. And Harbaugh even mentioned it. He was like, he said, Ravens are out there now simply just because last time they went at the last possible minute and it didn't go well. So just going to try something different. But even he admitted in the press conference, like, no data was found of like there being an advantage or disadvantage to what time you got out. It's literally just trying something different because what happened last time didn't work. So why not, But yeah, so you mentioned that the Titans were in London last year. I think it's kind of hard to keep track of teams that aren't the ones you follow, who's been international and how many times. How many times have the Titans been in the international series?
I think it's only been the once before, but I could be misremembering. Those early morning games, all fuzzy afterwards.
Yeah, definitely understand that. So I guess to get this conversation rolling, and we talked about it a little bit in the beginning, Titans, very interesting start to the season. They are undefeated at home and winless on the road. This game is technically listed as a home game for the Titans, but obviously, since it won't be in Nashville, it's really only home in name. Titans, really a hard team to peg down. They beat Cincinnati, they beat the Chargers, lost to Cleveland, lost to the Colts, lost to the Saints. At times, Derrick Henry has looked like his old self. At other times, he's been bottled up. Tannehill's been up and down. The defense shut down the Bengals, but then got rolled over by the Browns. Tim, if you're looking at this team right now, what's your read on it? Above expectations, below, at, or do you just have no idea?
Yeah, it's hard to get a true grasp of what's going on because I would have hoped they'd be better, but at the same time, like they're beating the teams who on paper are the better teams in their schedule and losing to the worst teams. And it was an especially frustrating loss this last week against a division rival, the Colts, and one that was a very winnable game. And I've seen some good and some bad, and what they've done in the Bengals game, the Chargers game. There's signs of life, and there's what they can be is at least visible. We know that they have it. What's capable of being a decent offensive team, especially after the misery of Todd Downing last year. So there's at least hope there, but there's also way too much inconsistency. It seems like every week there's one of the units doesn't show up, but it's not always the same unit. So we just need to play complementary football, and I think we'll be all right, but very frustrating.
Yeah, it looks like the offense is a kind of a rework in many ways from previous years. We have obviously Tannehill still at the helm, but Tajay Spears was drafted this year and has been spelling Henry maybe more than some people expected. He's definitely been involved and looking like a lightning bolt to the offense from time to time. You guys acquired Hopkins in the trade. Burks is hurt right now. Chris Moore's still there, which cracks me up that he's still in the league. Chig isn't playing particularly well yet, or at least hasn't been putting up stats. And then, of course, you guys have been reworking the line. So I'm kind of curious, given a lot of changes to each positional group. Since we last spoke to you, is the offense still relatively the same, or has the scheme changed much?
Yeah, I'd say it's quite different as far as like what they're trying to be. They have the same general identity, but they've definitely moved in some different directions. Some things in the offseason that I was really excited to hear was that they had a new, I believe he's their wide receiver coach and pass game coordinator, and he said specifically that we need to get the ball in the hands of our playmakers. I'm like, that's awesome. That's what I've been wanting them to do because, I mean, Tannehill spreads the ball around, but it also kind of seems like he's frustratingly a one-read kind of guy. The play's drawn up for somebody, and that's who he looks for. And when it's not there, maybe he scrambles. Honestly, it's been getting less likely he's been doing that lately, and it's just play blows up if his first look's not there. So I was like, if we were staring down and forcing it to the guys like DeAndre Hopkins, then something can hopefully happen. They've definitely changed their scheme up a little bit with Tim Kelly now as the offensive coordinator. I mentioned earlier about Todd Downing. I was definitely not a fan of Todd Downing. He was, in my opinion, the worst coordinator in the league last year. And he should have been fired after the DUI he got in the middle of the season, but clearly not. And now he latched on as a passing game coordinator with the Jets. But that's their problem now. With Derrick Henry, I'd say they need to be giving him the ball more. I'm glad they're not making him like necessarily a bell cow like he has been to this point, because keeping him fresh. But at the same time, he's best whenever he gets time to get going, especially wearing down a defense. The games they've lost, he has had not enough touches. In the games they've won, he's had plenty touches. So you can kind of see that pattern there, and it doesn't surprise me at all. A lot of their identity is built on the run, but it's also built on the play action. And Spears has been great, but when Spears is lined up behind Tannehill, they don't load the box like they do for Henry, so the play action isn't sold as well, and they don't have as many people up that they can then get past on a deeper route. So it's a lot hinges on Henry being on the field. Spears definitely has been really good. Maybe they'll start to treat him like more of a threat, but so far you don't give Derrick Henry the ball and you don't win.
Yeah, I mean, you look at the stats and it backs that your statement's backed up immediately by you look at this. Derrick Henry has had 2 games this season where he's had over 20 carries, and that's both your wins. In particular, I mean, he had an excellent game against Cincinnati. It was fine against the Chargers. Maybe not what you've come to expect from Henry, but still effective. His yards per carry are pretty low from what you come to expect from him. Do you think that's just a matter of, like you're saying, teams are loading the box more, or does it look like maybe age is finally catching up to the guy? I mean, he is 29 years old. That is on the older side for a running back. That is the type of time that you generally start to see some signs of age and wear and tear show up on these guys. So, when you look at Henry, who's been the heart and soul of your guys' offense for the past few seasons, do you think that if the Titans continue to give this guy the ball, or rather get back to getting this guy the ball, that he can still be that guy who can single-handedly carry an offense, carry you guys to the playoffs? Or are you, as a Titans fan, getting a bit concerned that his best days might be behind him and we're starting to see the decline of his career?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think he's declining as a player. I think a lot of it has to do with our offensive line and coaching. I think part of why they are trying to keep him fresh is because, he gets so many touches in a season. In the playoffs, he might wear down, and that's a legitimate concern, but that would be for anybody. And also, they're preparing for the possibility that he is no longer a Titan after this season. Spears, I really like Spears. I don't know how long of a career he's going to have, since he doesn't have an ACL in one leg and cartilage as well. So it's a little concerning that it might be like a one contract type player, but he looks really dynamic, and I'm glad he's getting touches. But yeah, Henry has been facing stacked boxes his entire career, so that's not necessarily new. Its offensive line last year was offensive. He had worst left tackle in like the last 20 years with Dennis Daly. I think they showed some stats on sacks allowed and pressures and all that, and he was pretty much at the top of the list in the last 2 decades. And he was a turnstile over there. There were so many plays I watched where he didn't even get hands on the guy rushing past him. And I'm like, you don't want to take a bad penalty, but at that point, at least hold the guy to make sure your quarterback doesn't get killed. But he was just standing there. This year, I'm still think that's the weakest link, Andre Dillard. I was hoping that they saw something that could bring out the potential the Eagles saw when they drafted him in the first round. So far, it has been anything but, and he has been the biggest problem on the line. I've been very happy with their new additions. Their first-round pick, Skoronski's missed the last 3 games before this one with an emergency appendectomy, and he was back yesterday. And then we have Brunskill from the 49ers at right guard has been holding his own. And surprisingly, Chris Hubbard at right tackle, who's played 73 snaps in the last 2 seasons before this, has been performing pretty well at right tackle. So it's mainly left tackle. I've noticed they've given more help, which I've been calling for, bringing in tight ends to help chip block, and just knowing that they're going to line up their heavy hitters on that side. So give them some help. And Henry has done better when the line has done better. It seems to go hand in hand. And I know, good running back should hopefully be able to create his own space, but there's only so much you can do whenever he's getting hit. I think they said the one Browns game, he was getting hit 7 feet behind the line of scrimmage, which you're not going anywhere. I don't care who you are if you're getting hit behind the line of scrimmage on average 7 feet behind it. So he's just not getting any room to run. I think some of their linemen that they picked up have been better in pass pro, but they've traded that off a little bit for run. So it's a work in progress. The line's starting to gel, I think, a little bit too. But there's that, and then there's coaching. The 4th and 1 that they just tried to run against the Colts with the 8 minutes left in the fourth quarter, it was obviously Henry territory, and they at least went with the right move to go with Henry, but they lined up in a shotgun and had Henry on Tannehill's right hip and then just handed it off to the side. You have to work with extra yards when you run the shotgun. The blocking wasn't really there. I'm like, just give him an I formation, give him an extra blocker playing fullback if you want, but run him down the middle. He's going to get that yard. So that was more of a coaching decision than on Henry. So I know it was a bit long-winded, but I don't blame it on Henry is the bottom line. I think it's a lot of things, but it's not him losing a step.
One thing I think that does work well for the Ravens, though, with all due respect to Henry, I mean, we talked about it in our recap of the Steelers game. One of the things that did go the Ravens' way in that game was the run defense, and it has gone our way all year. So I do like the Ravens in that matchup, but at the same time, I mean, Henry has burnt us before, so I'm not going to say here that it's a lock that I think that the Ravens will be able to contain him. They're going to have to take that seriously and really get some good push up front and have Roquan and Queen really attacking downfield. But yeah, I mean, so talking about Henry, I guess we'll move now to the receivers. It is interesting to me that DeAndre Hopkins has had some success here. I mean, his stats right now are kind of inflated from the 100-yard game he had against the Colts. But I mean, his numbers in the other games have been solid. But I mean, outside of him, I mean, none of these guys really, as a non-fan of the Titans, really come off the page to me. Nick Westberg, Ikine. I mean, Chris Moore, good gosh, is your guys' number 3 receiver, and Ravens fans are quite. Remember I don't even know what you want to say about Chris Moore as a receiver. All everyone ever remembers from him with the Ravens is as a special teamer. So I think that, and he was there for 4 years. So I think that says everything we need to say about Chris Moore. But so to me, it looks to me like the only guy on your offense who's a real receiving threat right now is Hopkins. And I'll admit, I haven't had a chance really to watch what he's done this year. From what you've seen, how much does he have left in the tank? Is he still D-Hop or and is it really the coaching that hasn't unlocked the big numbers that we usually see from him? Or does he look like a guy, more like, when you guys had Julio Jones or Andre Johnson, who's a guy who's just here for his his last ride on the Titans.
Yeah, I definitely wouldn't lump him in with those guys, especially not Andre Johnson and not Randy Moss either, who most people forget was a Titan.
Oh, that's right, he wasn't he?
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, I think D Hop has a lot left in the tank. I think it's a scheme thing that he hasn't really been getting the same numbers because I mean the Titans are a run first team and Tannehill does throw the ball to Nick Westbrook-Ikine a lot for some reason. I mean, he's been reliable. He's been a good, third, fourth receiver, but when he has to step up and be a first or second because of injury last year or whatever, he is often a frustration point for the fans, but I think he's solid when he's in the right spot. But Hopkins has made some pretty great catches so far this year. He doesn't get the ball thrown his way as much as he should. And week one, Tannehill was kind of forcing it to him. So, there was a lot of attempts there. The chemistry wasn't quite there yet. Tannehill, where's he going to be? And Hopkins knowing where Tannehill wants him to be. So once that chemistry has started to iron out, there's definitely been some better plays. Some of them were improvised. You could see Tannehill just knowing what Hopkins is going to do, clear out the linebacker and get open whenever Tannehill is having the pocket collapse. That kind of understanding of each other and their role has definitely been improving quite a bit. And he's made some impressive sideline catches. He's never really had a ton of speed, and he just finds ways to get open, whether it be a move or just understanding, routes well enough, what the cornerback can and can't do, and how to get separation. So that's still all there. It's just a matter of getting the plays that are designed for him and getting him the ball. Like you mentioned, the rest of the wide receiver core is a bit lacking, and that was definitely a concern going in, especially before Hopkins was signed. That's why everyone wanted him so bad. I know he is getting up there in age, but as far as options available, he was by far the best thing that the Titans could have done to that wide receiver room. Chris Moore, you say it, has actually made some impressive catches, some deep throws to him, over the shoulder catches that big spots too. Like he doesn't get targeted much, but when he has, he's come up pretty big.
Yeah, there's a couple interesting things to unpack with DeAndre Hopkins. Like you said, the first game he was force fed with 13 targets, but only 7 catches for 65 yards for yards per target of only 5 yards. The next 2 games, they were kind of in the wilderness there. There also were games that Burks was available in. But the last 2 games, Burks has not been available. Skoronski came back at guard, who was your 11th overall pick, which gives you an idea of how high caliber of a guard this guy might be. And suddenly, Hopkins' production has gone up to 10 yards and 12.7 yards per target the last 2 games without Burks around and with the added offensive line help. So I think those 2 things probably correlate a little bit, not just the production, the increased amount of yards and targets maybe, but also the efficiency of the yards per target.
Yeah, absolutely. He seems to be starting to fit in more with the offense, and the pieces around him have definitely helped. I think Burks being on the field does help him, despite the fact that he's had his better games with Burks off, because Burks, his potential has been there. He's shown flashes, and he's still the stature of the guy. You have to pay attention to him. He's a big body wide receiver, similar to AJ Brown was. The hope was going to be that he'd be a cheaper, younger AJ Brown. That maybe will still pan out, but at this point, AJ Brown was already looking like a star, and Burks seems to have trouble staying on the field. That's not really his fault, but it is what it is. But Hopkins has been the go-to guy when they really need a play. Third down plays, it always seems to be Hopkins, and they haven't really targeted him much in the red zone yet, but they've had trouble in the red zone lately, so I'm hoping to see more of that and more of Henry in the red zone as well. So I think there's plenty of opportunity for growth, and I'm excited to see what Hopkins can do on this team.
Another thing I want to unpack about this team is Tennessee is currently 27th in the league in sacks allowed at 3.14 or 3.14. That's pi 3.4 sacks per game. I know you said that the offensive line, some people have come back and looked a little bit better. Some people are looking not great. Are you nervous about the Ravens pass rush in this game?
I mean, I'm always nervous about pass rush with this offensive line, but I think they can hold their own well enough. I mean, I know Bosa was hurt, but with Bosa and Mac over in LA, they did pretty well. With Skronsky being back, I think that's the biggest thing because that was only his second game, and he definitely looked a little still like he needs some time to get back into the swing of things. So I mean, he lost a bunch of weight when he had his appendectomy. It did rupture, so it was something that caused him to be down for a while. He had to put a lot of weight on real quick, and game one shows what he can be, and not. So I'm going to really ignore what happened in this last game and look at the first game when he was showing why he could be special in this league. He was the first NFL game ever, and he was their best lineman. So I think that's going to be the true test is him being back and giving help to Dillard. And if they can do that, I think they'll be all right. Tannehill is also starting to get the ball out quicker. I've noticed he still takes some unnecessary sacks, but I've seen him get the ball out quicker in some key spots. And there have been times where they've tried moving the pocket by play design, and also he's scrambled a couple times. And I'm like, that's what we've been needing on his end. I'm seeing some of it. It's not consistent, but the flashes are there and promising.
Moving on to the defensive side of the ball, one of the things that's made this rivalry so interesting in recent years is that Tennessee has been one of the teams that, along with the Pittsburgh Steelers, has done a pretty consistently decent job. I mean, really, honestly, it pains me to say it. A very good job in containing Lamar Jackson, the things that he likes to do. Even though the last meeting, Lamar did finally win against Tennessee. Still wasn't his best game ever as a pro. He did have that long touchdown, but only 179 passing yards. He did have that pick on an ill-advised throw to Boykin. This is a matchup. Mike Vrabel and the Titans defense, like, they've done a really good job in these first three meetings at containing Lamar. From your perspective, Tim, what do you think was really the key in that? And do the Titans still have the scheme and the personnel to be able to have and execute that type of game plan that you guys used against Lamar a few years ago?
Oh, I think it's not the same as what they had then, but I think there's still ways that they can make it work. Their pass rush and their defensive line is one of the best in the NFL. I know they didn't get any sacks against the Colts last week, but I'm a bit perplexed of exactly what happened there. But I mean, they have a lot of guys who are going to create pressure, and as long as they can, make sure they contain the edge and don't give Lamar a lane and they can get pressure on him, then that would definitely be a big key to keeping him out of those dynamic plays. Their linebackers are not really coverage guys, so that can be interesting in the short game, and especially who's going to need someone to spy on the QB and be ready for him to take off. Their secondary has been really weak, so if he can get the ball out quick to a short route, it could be, unfortunately, a way to exploit the Titans, because Christian Fulton's supposed to be their cornerback one, and he has been awful this year, drawing a lot of unnecessary penalties. Separation has been insane, and he just doesn't look like the guy that was starting to look like a lockdown corner a couple years ago, and this is a contract year for him, so not a good look. But I think if they can keep the ball out of the secondary, I know that's a big ask, but the D-line does their job, then there's ways to contain.
One thing I'm looking at is Caleb Farley's still hurt. The guy entered the league hurt. It seems like he's been struggling to stay on the field and is out right now. I imagine that's putting some stress on those corners, like you were mentioning earlier.
Well, at this point, they're not really expecting him to be a starter. They can't depend on that. So if he comes back and lives up to his first round potential, that would be awesome. But they didn't design their roster around him being a starting outside cornerback. They were hoping that Fulton would be, but outside of him, McCreary is a sophomore, and he looks like he's having a really good second season. So that's promising. They got Sean Murphy-Bunting from the Buccaneers out of free agency, and he's looked pretty good, made a lot of plays. Byard is still Kevin Byard, but he hasn't really made any plays this year, so I'm not sure exactly. We haven't really been calling his name for blown coverages either, but he also hasn't really shown up. And then their other safety is Amani Hooker, who has been he had the only pick they've had this season, and he's been overall like solid guy when he's healthy. So they have pieces in the secondary. It's just frustrating when it does all come together. I think part of that is scheme because they often line up like 10 yards off the wide receiver at the line of scrimmage, and then those short routes kill them. They try not to give up the big X plays, and then they still happen anyway because somebody miscommunicates, somebody doesn't understand where their zone is or who's supposed to follow the guy up top. So it happens. I don't know if it's coaching. I don't know if it's the players, but we don't need Farley. We don't need him right now. If he comes back, that would be great, but we don't need him.
Another guy on your injury report who didn't play last week against the Colts is interior defensive lineman. I believe you say his name, Teair Tart. Did I have that correct?
That's correct. Yeah, that's right.
Some of the articles I was reading this week said that his absence last week really wasn't great for the run defense, that he was definitely a guy that was needed. Is he, I mean, I'm looking at his profile. I mean, 6'2", 304 guy. He's been a 4-year starter for you guys. Is he really crucial for your guys' a run defense in the interior?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that was the biggest thing that we were missing against the Colts and why Zach Moss is able to go off for 165 yards, because Hart is a big guy, like you were just saying, but he's also surprisingly nimble and strong. You know, he's not a guy who's going to be doing much in the way of pass rush, but he's going to clog up the middle and create opportunities for pass rush. And then on the rushing defense, he's just always a big body in the middle. And where they got us the most was runs up the middle. So signs all point to missing Tart was a huge difference. He has been great for us, and I think that's also a sign that they should sign him to a longer-term contract after the end of the season, because they gave him exactly what the term was now, but they had, as an undrafted free agent, they gave him a tender that made it so if he signed for another team, the other team would have to give up a second-round pick. Obviously, no team was willing to give up a second-round pick for a guy who nobody really knows about at this point, but everyone figured this might be the year where he gets noticed, and his absence speaks volumes in that game. So we need him back if we're going to contain the run.
Always love hearing stories of those type of guys. I mean, the Ravens, as our listeners know, have really found a lot of those guys, undrafted, run stuffing, interior linemen, or late round, so that's cool that he's been that big for your guys' defense. He's undrafted, fine. It's always great when you can get that type of value there.
Absolutely. Yeah. He was a guy who I think went undrafted for people worried about his attitude, but so far he hasn't really been an issue as far as I've seen. Sometimes people get a little frustrated with his willingness to try to play through injury, but because, he was out with a toe injury, it didn't seem that bad. The D-line coach seemed frustrated when asked about it, but when he's out there, he definitely seems to give it his all.
Look at the linebacking core. I'd love a little bit more information about him. I know like Arden Key, that's a name I remember. Looks like Jack Gibbons is in his second year. Walk me through this group.
Yeah, they have a few that have been surprising how they've been. Arden Key, I guess, not too surprising because he started to show up for the Jaguars last year in limited rotational snaps, and week one, he already looked like he had the potential to be I want to say a star outside linebacker, but he's been held in check a little bit recently, but he still gets some pressures, just the sacks aren't showing up. But I think that's not necessarily his fault. I think he's getting more attention now. I think his double team rate is pretty up there. Jack Gibbons, you said, he's a second-year player. He was also an undrafted find, and he won the job out of camp over Monty Rice, who was a third-round pick a couple years ago, which was surprising. And honestly, Gibbons has looked very good. He's slow in coverage, but otherwise he has been much better than expected and holding the job pretty well. Harold Landry, opposite Key, looks to be a little slow coming back from his ACL tear. He missed all of last season, and he's just doesn't really quite look like he has the same explosiveness, but I think that's just going to be something that comes back in time, hopefully. And then Azeez Al-Shaair from the 49ers, he was one of those guys that Ran Carthen knew from his time in San Francisco. He was a backup guy, but flashed in limited opportunities, and we brought him in to show that he can be a starter. And honestly, he's done pretty well. He looked a little lost in the last game, but before that, he was playing very well, and I was very happy with his first 4 games of the season.
So I guess before we go on to score predictions, I think one thing we do have to talk about, since this has been a topic of conversation for the Ravens this year, is special teams. Ravens, we've had some issues with kick coverage, particularly in the punt return. Had the block punt last week. Obviously, the big punt return touchdown against the Bengals. Just overall, some sloppiness in punt return and kick return coverage that you really don't see from the Ravens. Something really hoping the Ravens can get right in the coming weeks. But yes, I mean, as far as the Titans are concerned, anything of note with the special teams, or is that just a unit that's humming as you would expect?
Nothing to be concerned about from the Tennessee side. I'd say there's been some good special team plays, some good open field tackles on kick coverage. There's been a couple turnovers. One of those was actually from the safety I mentioned earlier, Amani Hooker. He had the opening drive kickoff fumble that was caused in New Orleans. That was a great start to the season. It looked like it was going to be a great way to get off to a hot start, and only ended up with a field goal, but it was at least points on the board. But special teams has showed up where it needs to be. I'm interested to see how punt returns are going to go, because Kyle Phillips is a 5th round draft pick that they had 2 years ago that was flashing potential as a wide receiver and punt returner, but he seemed to also not be able to stay healthy. I mean, he's basically my size. He's 5'11", 190 pounds. So when he's getting hit by some of these guys, I'm not necessarily surprised. But he pops back up usually when he does get hit. It's just a matter of his body letting him, and he has the toughness aspect. So I'm interested to see him being back with punt returns, if he can create something out of what they. You said the Ravens have been struggling with that, so I'm interested to see if he can make something out of that.
Yeah, man, it's been rough for a team that prides itself in having good special teams. I noticed that you guys had a 6 overall ranking in special teams DVOA. So take that as you will. Morgan Cox is there right now as a long snapper. We know him well from Baltimore. And we'll definitely have to keep an eye on this group. Don't love seeing that Tyjae Spears as your kick returner. It makes me a little nervous.
Yeah, Spears is definitely pretty electric on the field. I don't know if you've watched much with him in Tennessee or if you just seen him out of Tulane, but he has been everything that people thought he could be. I was surprised when we drafted him in the 3rd round, because I was expecting wide receiver, and I was like, a running back, like the last thing I expected. But he's done very well. And yeah, Morgan Cox has been an all-pro at long snapper. It's an important position, but also one that, you're not really, if you're talking about your long snapper being one of the better players in your team, it's not really a good look, but happy to have him all the same. And then Folk at place kicker has been a revelation, because they've been scrambling for consistency at the kicking position ever since they let go of Ryan Suckup a few years ago. And then their punter, Ryan Stonehouse, has been elite. He's been one of the better punters in the league, and he's a 2nd year undrafted. I mean, he's a punter. Most are undrafted, but he's a 2nd year, and he's got quite the leg on him. He's going to get it averaging 50 yards pretty regularly. I've seen some 60, 70 yard punts, and he's starting to place them. So he's a weapon to have. He's going to help flip the field. If the Titans offense can't get going, they'll just keep moving the field back until eventually they can hopefully get good field position and finally score.
All right. Well, as our guest, feel free to start off with your bold predictions and your score predictions, and we'll go from there.
Oh man, let's see.
You can also defer. You have the option
about it.
Yeah, you have the option to go first or defer.
Yeah,
it's like a coin toss. Yeah, but the guest always wins the coin toss.
Okay, I will defer for now. Let me think on it.
I have one, Peter. So for my bold prediction, I'm going to say that the Ravens outside linebackers, after being zeroed last game, will get 3 sacks or more in this matchup. Does that feel bold enough?
I think Tim's analysis of the offensive line will tell you that. Tim, does 3 sacks from the Ravens against the Titans offensive line sound bold?
Specifically the outside linebackers.
Oh, specifically the outside linebackers.
Yeah.
Well, that's the position group that's most likely to get a sack.
But they didn't do it last week.
They didn't do it last week. All right. I'll let it go. Oh, yeah, that's fine. Yeah, you can have that one. That's
I don't know. Our inside linebackers, man, they've been getting a lot of the pressure too. So I don't know. I think they're only averaging 3.4 a game. So for them all to be from the linebackers, I think would be kind of interesting. Or the outside linebackers. Gotta be correct in that in those words. And then for the score prediction, man, it's like if I bet on this offense being productive, that's not necessarily a good bet. But I think they need to wake up. I think they're going to be really drilled in. London was bad for them last time or whatever. So I'm gonna say that they actually put up some points. I don't think it's going to be burner, but I'm gonna say they can put up 27 points, and I think Tennessee is only going to score about 10. So 27-10. Ravens do win. Try to get back right after that disappointing loss.
Weird things happen across the pond. Weird games happen. So I really don't know what's going to happen here. Like if this game was in Nashville, if this game was in Baltimore, I think I'd have a better read on it. But the going across the pond, the not knowing which side the crowd is going to have more on, if there is one, I have no idea which of these two teams have a bigger international draw. I mean, we're not talking about the Cowboys or the Steelers going over there, teams that have fan bases outside their respective cities. So I'm going for a weird game. I think there's going to be some sloppiness, which is going to lead to some more high scoring game than I think we would expect from these two teams. I think we'd expect this game to kind of, hover around, 40 points total in general. If this game was stateside, I'm going to say the Ravens win 31-28. And my bold prediction this game is that the wide receiver group will step up. I think that after a game like they had against the Steelers with all those drops, that's going to wake up that room. And I'm going to predict that 3 separate players, they can be any position. I know I'm highlighting the wide receivers here. I'm expecting it'll be wide receivers, but / tight ends. But 3 separate offensive players on the Ravens will score a touchdown from Lamar Jackson, which has not happened terribly often in the past 3 seasons. Doing a quick look at it, I might have missed some games, but I only counted 4 times this has happened since the start of the 2020 season.
And I'll add that right now, the only wide receiver that has a touchdown is Aguilar. So
it's bold.
It's bold. So we're looking to buck that trend in a big way. They come in bunches. Very interesting. Got one, Tim?
Yeah, I think I managed to think one up. So part of it's going to be wishful thinking on my end, not necessarily that bold given the name, but I think DeAndre Hopkins is going to get 2 touchdowns. I think that's really what's going to help us in the red zone right now. I mean, the Titans were moving the ball very well against the Colts, and they just kept stalling in the red zone, and that's where Hopkins, I think, could shine because he's going to make those contested catches in limited space. He's going to be a guy that they should look for, and he hasn't got his first Titans touchdown yet. This will be the game where he finally gets it and adds another one on top of that. That's probably going to rely on Henry having a game too, so maybe that's a twofer because probably going to work the best of the play actions working, and the play action's going to work with Henry being on the field a lot. But yeah, I think Hopkins is going to be what puts the Titans up over the edge. I think the Titans are going to win a close game, 24-21. Titans love to win games they're not favored for and then lose the ones they are. They've won more games as the underdog than anybody else in the NFL the last few years. So, when they're the underdog is when you really are supposed to watch out for them, as weird as that sounds. So I think it'll be a close game. It may be sloppy, like you were saying, overall, but it'll be, I think, a close victory for the Titans.
Yeah, and I'm curious what Chris has to say, so we'll drop him in now for his bold predictions.
Hey, a little late on the recording here, but I just wanted to give my bold and score predictions for this week at the London game against the Titans. I think this is going to be a close one. It's funny, my in-laws were just here last week, and they're Bills fans, and I was kind of telling them before the game, I was like, look, these London games are real weird. I would not expect to be at full strength overseas. I kind of feel the same. This Titans team is a little middling, though, so I do think it's going to be a close game, but I don't feel good about it. I guess I'll say the Ravens come away with a win, 20-17. As far as bold prediction, it probably says more about the state of the Ravens pass rush right now and outside linebacker group than it does the Titans, but I think we're going to get away with 5 sacks at least. I think it's a good matchup for the Ravens here. I think the Titans' offensive line is in a bit of trouble. But yeah, otherwise, we'll see what happens. I am looking forward to a full day of football, though. It'll be a lot of fun.
Thanks, Chris, for those. I will say, Tim, you and us are kind of the same, where it seems like the Ravens have stepped up in games that were, they weren't favored to win, like against the Bengals this year, and against the Browns too. Even though they had the backup quarterback, they weren't favored originally. And then in these games that they're favored, they have stinkers, total stinkers, and we got to see that turn around from the Ravens' perspective. And it sounds like the Titans feel the same way. So definitely difficult when your team kind of rises to the level of their opponent.
Yeah, there's a lot of similarities I see between the two right now, especially when you're saying about the frustrations of losing to a divisional opponent last week. That was probably the toughest pill to swallow so far this season for us, was losing to the Colts the way we did, especially with our supposed vaunted rush defense being gashed for 165 to not even Jonathan Taylor, but Zach Moss. But, I mean, the losses have been, aside from the Browns game, have been relatively close. The Saints game, I feel like, I hate to always make this excuse, but the Saints game would have been entirely different if the refs were consistent with their call of what is a fumble when the quarterback is hit before the throwing motion. Because there was one where Carr was gearing up to throw it. The replay showed he clearly did not go forward with it. They not only blew the play dead on what would have been an easy return for a touchdown, but then in review, they had all the announcers agreeing that it was a clear fumble. Gene Steratore came on and agreed, and then they go to the field and they did not overturn it. They left it as an incomplete pass, and that was a easy field goal for the Saints. It was a 10-point swing, and then they lost by 1 point. So that was kind of heartbreaking, and glad we could shake it off quick with a win against the Chargers, but that inconsistency of win, lose. We just lost. It's a win coming up. That's so far how this season has been going. And at least for this next week, I hope that trend continues. Well,
we'll certainly see. 9 o'clock or 9:30 game. So make sure to get up early and get ready for this game. I guess it's not too bad from the East Coast, but I guess for you, you're living now in Texas, so it's a little bit earlier still.
Yeah, it's actually going to be even worse for me because I'll be in Albuquerque this weekend, so it'll be 7:30 a.m.
Yeah, so we can't complain at 9:30. You got it worse.
Yeah, I don't even like waking up 7:30 on a weekday. So, but for football, I'll make an exception.
Make an exception. There you go. Well, Tim, thanks so much for joining us. We really appreciate your insights on the Titans. It really helped us understand this matchup better.
Thanks. I'm glad I could help. It's being a Titans fan, and everyone always just sees, what they want to see with the Titans, or they just don't necessarily care about the Titans, and everyone sees stat lines and say, oh, Derrick Henry's washed, or Ryan Tannehill is bottom 10 quarterback. And it's like, sometimes I can't really argue with the Tannehill thing, but he also can be good when set up to succeed. But I'm glad to always provide insight into the Titans because, one thing that frustrates me as a Titans fan, I'm glad I could help people kind of understand what's going on over there in Nashville.
Awesome. Well, with that, we'll wrap up the show. You can find us on Twitter at OneWinningPod, Threads at OneWinningPod, and of course, you can email us onewinningpod@gmail.com. We'll be back next week talking about either a win or a loss in the UK, hoping for the best. Go Ravens.